Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today I got the idea to do a video comparing three decks from different areas and how they might have influenced each other. Now, each of these three decks is atypical of decks that we're accustomed to seeing now, especially when we refer to the Tarot of Marseille. I'm going to be comparing the Tarot of Jacques Viéville, and I'm going to be using the most recent purchase I have of that publication, which is the Artisan Tarot. I'm going to be using the Tarocchino Al Soldato that I just received from Lo Scarabeo. And then also the Vandenborre. Okay, that one was done in unison between US Game Systems Inc. and Carta Mundi in Belgium. So the Tarot de Jacques Viéville was created around 1650, somewhere between 1634 and 1660. So let's say 1650 as a safe in the middle kind of date in Paris. The Tarocchino Al Soldato in Bologna, and I'll show you the map showing where they are in proximity to each other. And then the Vandenborre about 1775 in Belgium. Now, I could show you the Fina della Torre from the 1600s, which would probably have been a contemporary of the Jacques Viéville in Paris. But I'm showing the El Soldato because the Bolognese tarot decks really didn't change all that much from the beginning till today, except now they have the double-ended cards. But I'm showing the Al Soldato instead of the Fina della Torre because the cards 2 through 5 are a little more interesting because they have the four Moors rather than the Papessa, Empress, Emperor, and the Pope. So let me flip the camera, show how they are in relation to the map. Because, I'm American and a lot of people who watch my videos are American. And, we have a lot in our own country with states that could be countries, and I think probably there are a lot of people from other countries who aren't as familiar as we are, of course, with our states and where they lay in one country. And I think Americans also sometimes need assistance in remembering the proximity of European countries or Asian countries too. So for the benefit of those of you who would appreciate this, I'm showing it. So let's start with the earliest location represented by the earliest deck, which is the Jacques Viéville in Paris. And it came out, as I said, 1650 Paris. Now, the second deck, this particular one, 1750, but as I mentioned, from the 1600s, the Bolognese, from the earliest of times and the earliest Bolognese decks we have, their decks really didn't change all that much, with the exception of around 1725 when they took the four Moors. But prior to the four Moors, prior to 1725, they were cards 2 through 5 as we're accustomed to seeing. And in yesterday's video, I did make a mistake and I said 1750 was the cutoff date. I knew better. I don't know why I said 1750, but it was really 1725. And then the Vandenborre from Belgium in proximity to France. Here's Belgium. And then the Bolognese deck around here. So although we could argue that the Italian Bolognese deck is far from Paris, it's not all that far from Marseille, which is down here. This map, I think it's down here. And then it's not far from the Swiss influence, which is here. So I think very much, countries, these three countries, were influenced and were aware of what each other were doing. I'd like to thank also Dr. Jeremy from I had to pause because my brain drew a blank. From Temple of Miriam sent me this beautiful wand as a gift, and I love it, and I do mention it from time to time, but I want to mention it again. I use it very often for a variety of things. Okay, so let's take a look at the three decks. Now we have the Jacques Viéville, 1650 Paris, and he is very much in keeping with the tradition that we're accustomed to with the Marseille style of things. We do see a fool head, kind of mimics him, and it could be a reference to a play in, I think, Venice or somewhere in Italy from the 1500s about the innkeeper and the dueling innkeepers. I think one was called the Mirror and one was, I forget what they were called. However, I can direct you to a book, the source of this information. Hold on. Okay, it's this book, and I've done a video on this topic. And if I can find it, I'll link it down below. But this is an excellent resource if you want to get it. It's written by Ross Sinclair, Caldwell, Thierry DePaulis, and Marco Ponzi. Anyway, we do see a reference to the image of the fool's head repeated here. And it is in keeping with what we see in the Vandenborre. Now I've disregarded the number of all the decks. I've just put them in the same order despite whatever their numbers say. And I've put them in the order that we're accustomed to seeing. Now here we have what looks like the mane of a cat with different color. And here it kind of looks more like a dog. Remember, this is from Paris and this is from Belgium, or the Flemish tarot. And like the Italian decks, the deck from Paris, thus far, we don't see names, but we do see them in the Flemish. And in the Belgian, in the Italian from Bolognese, we have quite a different image of a fool. This one in the tradition of a music maker or a noise maker. The three of them have similar content, although the hats in the Viéville and the Vandenborre are more similar than the hat we have in the Bolognese deck, but what they're doing is similar. And in the Italian, we have an audience, which we do not have in the other two. But in all three, they are out of doors. Now this is where the decks kind of get interesting in their departure of ways. We have in the French deck the female pope. In the Bolognese deck, after 1725, we see four Moors replacing cards 2 through 5. And in the Belgian deck, now this is 1775, I'm not exactly sure what year the Flemish adopted the Spanish captain. But we see that in all three of these decks, we have different representation for the number 2 card. And of course, when we would interpret the cards, because they're so different, I think it would be natural to apply different meanings to them. I mean, the Spanish captain is quite different from the female pope, who may be a reference to Pope Joan. And the more of these 4 cards, some of them have representations of like sun and moon, this one being the moon. So there might still be a holdout for celestial leaders or religious leaders versus secular leaders. So that's possible. It's still being represented, but they are not overtly, religious or secular leaders from Italy, at least. Okay, we have the Empress. Again, we have a secular leader from a different place, foreign place. And then we, in common with the Flemish, still do have the Empress. With similar representation of the globe, with the cross and the eagle. Now, in this card with the Moor, we do see a reference to a bird. So this could be a nod to, the same position, right? A worldly leader. Okay, we have the Emperor. Very similar in the deck out of Paris and the deck out of Belgium, with the difference in the Moor. Again, though, we see the globe, the hint of a globe with the the slightest reference to, could be the emperor, another secular leader. But, not to offend the competing powers that be in Italy, secular versus religious, and not giving the secular leaders in Italy power or, or authority over the religious leaders in Italy, because that was dicey business. So what they did was, they had individuals who were not from Italy, so they couldn't offend anybody. They were just maybe representing the same concepts if they bothered to give similar, detail, but not overtly being from Italy. And so we have a distinction in all 3 of these cards. We have the Pope, as we were accustomed to seeing in Italy. But in Bologna, after 1725, we have, again, one of the 4 Moors. This one, we do see, let's see, the emblem of the sun. I think the other cards might have had a sun in the corners as well. And then we have Bacchus, who could not be any different than the staid and conservative Pope, although the Pope could have very clearly been corrupt, as they, I think, were frequently. This, in a way, could be said to be the true nature, of corruption in that position. But and then we toe the line when we get to the 6th card of each deck. With the exception of the Italian Bolognese deck, we have 3 people present in the French and Belgium deck. And in the Bologna deck, we just have the couple and Cupid, and all 3 have Cupid. But the representation of Cupid is more similar in these 2 decks, as is the representation of 3 people. And you know, in the Bolognese deck, we have a fountain, which we've seen in other Italian decks. Again, as a reminder, I put them in the same order despite whatever numbers are written on the cards. So we have the Chariot, and all three are different. Justice. All three have the scales. She doesn't, all three also have a sword. And one of them has a globe. And the Hermit. Now, in none of these do we see the lantern that we have become accustomed to seeing in the Tarot of Marseille, and neither do we see an hourglass. Here, it appears as though the Hermit is reading a book. And I don't see those things here. It could be argued that this might be some kind of wick or flame or something, but I doubt it. It looks more like the fold of the cloth. However, they all are elderly gentlemen. They clearly seem to represent the passage of time. And the Italian deck lays it on particularly heavily with, you know, the crutches and the burden of life being a long life, you know, being hard on one. The Italians have wings on the Hermit as though he's a virtuous kind of individual, or with age comes wisdom, which could be seen as a virtue. And here, the wisdom, it might be categorized by the book. The Wheel of Fortune. Pretty similar in concept in all three. And you see the similarity of the hair and then this fan-shaped thing, you know, so there's some crossover here. They look, you know, very similar. Whereas the Bolognese deck, you know, seems to have a reference to Lady Fortune. And, you know, I reigned, I have no reign, I have reigned, I reign, I have reigned, I have no reign, and I will reign, right? We have more of that message in the Italian deck. And we have Fortitude, represented slightly differently. In the Parisian and Belgian deck, we see an individual, not necessarily a woman or a man, it's kind of hard to tell, with the lion. And in the Italian deck, we have the appearance of a column, which we see frequently in Italian decks describing fortitude. And notice in the Italian decks, there are no numbers, right? I mentioned this yesterday in the video I did, that the Italians knew the sequential order of their cards. They invented the game, you know, so they knew the order and they knew the names, and there was no need to give them names or order. Now, in the Parisian deck, the Jacques Viéville, we don't see the names, we see numbers. In the Italian deck, we don't see the names, we see the numbers. So perhaps the Parisian deck was close enough to the source that they knew what they were called. But when we get to Belgium, we see, you know, that the names are there, you know. So 1650 Paris, perhaps it wasn't necessary to put names on the cards. Italy, it probably never really was until, you know, maybe in later years to make the game palatable to other people. Now we see, historically this image, it was a hanged individual, and if you don't know why, I've done so many videos on it that I'm not going to spend too much time talking about why we know that this is a hanged individual. But we can clearly see that these two, again, share the commonality of the image being upside down. Could be a lack of familiarity with the source, plus they have a similar number while they're upright. But all three, if we put this guy upside down or right side up, all three share the commonality of being blonde, being hung by a foot, and the particular crossing of legs that we see from the gallows. Now look at the death in these two cards. They again seem to share a similar source. We have the billowing, flowing scarf. We have the walking stick. One is named, one is not. They have the flower in common. Their rib cages look a lot alike. Their head looks a lot alike. And in the Bolognese, we have this guy with the scythe. Oh, this is also a scythe, excuse me. I didn't see. I should have known. And then this one, we don't see the scythe so much because the Lamort is printed here, but this thing might be the scythe, actually. They might have put the scythe above the title card, the title banner. So I stand corrected. All three have a scythe. Okay, we have Temperance. These two again share a commonality, including the reversal of the words, right? So it's like they were copied from a direct image, and then when they were printed, they were reversed. And then this one being a little more similar to what we're accustomed to seeing for a Temperance card. So you see a lot of familiarity between what was happening in Paris and Belgium. Now, all three of these are pretty similar. These two, of course, being more similar. Again, almost, one being based on the other. Very similar. But in the Italian deck, it's not all that different. We have, it could be, a tongue in flames. They have a similarity in wings. They all have tails. And their feet are similar. They don't all have the faces or facial features in the belly and the body joints. This one has a pitchfork. Okay, so this is interesting. Now, the card that we associate with, the tower, or the energy of the tower. In one, we have a shepherd with a flock under a tree. There is no lightning. It's been called the thunderclap. There is some kind of celestial disturbance because it feels like that, and we see, all that flurry of activity in the sky. So I think it leads one to believe that there's some type of celestial disturbance, right? So we don't see lightning, but maybe it was thunder. Here we have a very similar image. However, we see something very clearly that appears to be like lightning that is causing flame. And I think Le Foudre, I think that means thunder. I don't think it means lightning, even though, you know, lightning is depicted. But please correct me if you know better. I should have looked up the word before I did the video, but I trust that you won't be too offended by my not remembering what that is. I used to know, but I don't remember. And then in the Italian card, although, you know, we do see individuals on the ground, we don't see them actively falling. We understand that they have fallen or they've perished. You know, the tower itself is on fire. We don't necessarily see the lightning or the source of what caused this to happen. And the star card, again, very similar between the Parisian and the Belgian, whereby we have an astronomer at night with his calipers or whatever those tools are called, with a, you know, what looks like a church or some type of, well, maybe not a church, but some type of city building, a municipal building maybe. And then in the Bolognese deck, it appears as though we have like the three wise men maybe. But all three, of course, representing the concept of the star. Now this is really interesting, and I mentioned this the other day. The moon card here is represented by spinners, right? A woman spinning thread in the evening. But we see that happening in the sun card in the Italian deck. So there was a miscue, perhaps, with the French and the Belgium interpreting this as the moon rather than the sun. And in the Bolognese moon card, we don't have, what we're accustomed to seeing, TDM, in any of these cards. But here is where we have the appearance of astronomers, with their calipers and gazing into the nighttime sky for the moon. It's possible that it was a deliberate switch from the daytime to the nighttime. Maybe they were associating women's, threading of wool or whatever thread that was with women's work, which maybe they associated women with the moon. Maybe that was why they did this. Or maybe it was just a mistake. And we have the sun card. With the woman, with the threading, because it would have been something that was an activity that would have been done in the daytime. So in the Italian deck, that's what we see. And in the French and in the Flemish deck, again, an uncanny similarity. So Vandenborre was clearly familiar with the Viéville. Okay, now we have the Judgment card or the Angel card. All three having a similar representation of an angel with a horn and individuals rising. And let's take this opportunity to go ooh and ah over this card being so beautiful. It really is. Most of these cards are really beautiful in the artisan Jacques Viéville. I oohed and ahed over it in a couple other videos, so I'm going late on it today, but I just want to comment on how beautiful this particular card is. And the World card. Okay. We see it, right? The individual in the World card in a mandala. We don't see it here. And we don't see it here. In this case, these two cards are more similar. The Italian and the Belgium. The Flemish card are more similar. And here we see you know, a characteristic of the TDM, right? Now, I already know we're at 30 minutes, so I don't know how interested many of you are in hanging in there. In the Ace of Cups here, we see something that's very similar to what we're accustomed to seeing with TDM. But notice in the Italian and the Flemish card, they seem to be more similar. Now, the Italian card seems to be more of a font, maybe a baptismal font, although I don't think there's 8 sides, there's 6. Or a fountain, just a fountain. And here we see, you know, the beginning of like the characteristic Swiss cups, right? That have that kind of fluid design on the Ace of Cups. Now for the 2 through 5, I've borrowed from a Marco Benedetti deck, the Bolognese, because 2 through 5 are missing from a Tarocchino deck, which I described in previous videos, that when you see Ino at the end of an Italian word, it means it's an abbreviated deck. But we have no reason to believe that had there been cards 2 through 5 in a Bolognese deck, they would have looked similarly to this. But these two have more in common, with including the written descriptor. And we see, the TDM motif of 3. We don't really know what this one would have been like. It could have been 3 in a row. It could have been like this. Who knows? Had it existed in the first place. If I'd have pulled the Fina della Torre, but I think that was also a abbreviated deck that Marco, or the Marco and also the Italian Museum, it put additional cards in for the 2 through 5. So I think it might be safe to say that the Bolognese decks were always of the abbreviated variety of 62 cards versus 78. But just for posterity or continuity, I've just replaced the 2 through 5 of this Soldato deck with something by Marco Benedetti. Okay, now with the 6, we see similarity between all 3, and the 6 would have been original to this deck. With the French and the Belgium decks including floral motif, whereas the Italians just focused on the cups. We see a difference in the layout of the 7s between the French, Belgium, and the Italian. These two, again, being more similar. For those of you hanging in there, thank you very much. I assume you're hanging in there because you're really interested in seeing how across the board these decks are similar or not. So we have 8 here, and in the Flemish deck, very similar motif, and in the Italian deck, a completely different placement of the cups. The 9 of Cups is the same distribution formatting across the board, with the French and the Flemish having embellishments of floral design. And then we see the 10 with, you know, barely having room for the 10th card, so they lay it on its side on the top, and we're accustomed to seeing this top card, this top cup being facing in the other direction. And so again, there's like a suggestion that this was a reversal, another suggestion for why these decks might have been reversed. But the Italian deck has a different distribution, and for the first time we see flowers, which is interesting. Okay, now in the Italian cups and coins, the lowest ranking court card was a female rather than a young man. I call this card my boyfriend card because I'm fascinated by him, even though, but you know, as a young gentleman here in the French deck, he is wearing a hat. He does seem to have a lid for the chalice, which is very interesting. He does seem to have a lid for the chalice, and some of the other decks that I've discussed, whenever I see him, you know, there's like a cloth that's spilling over the chalice, and he does not have a hat. He's carrying his hat, and on his head he has a wreath. So this is quite a different representation. Of course, the woman, valet, has no, there's no crossover as far as having a lid for the cup or the chalice. Look, she does have something in her hand. We don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. And the youth here, yeah, he does seem to have something in his hand. It's not as clearly looking like a lid as this one is. Wow, this one clearly does look like a lid. This is ambiguous. Who knows what that is? But if it's a copy, they might not have known what they were copying. And we have a youth with a hat on his head and an open chalice. Well, this is very interesting. And you could see, you know, how this covering kind of drapes his arm. And so I wonder if, like, the subtle draping of the arm somehow became part of draping over the cup. I don't know. But that does look like a lid. Yeah. Okay, we have the Knight going in different directions. These two, much more animated with the horse's front legs. This one, less animated and going in the opposite direction. The Queens of Cups. Again, these two being more similar. And you see the hint of what the Swiss cups look like, right? This is why I love looking at the decks, and I love looking at all the cards of a deck, because you see these subtle crossovers that you might not have noticed. And I know sometimes my videos get a little long, and I'm not the most dynamic, exciting person on the planet, you know, but I love tarot, and I love showing tarot, and I love talking about tarot. So, and if you're hanging with me after 39 minutes and 26 seconds, I imagine you're similar. Okay, again, we have two Kings of Cups that look an awful lot alike, as do their cups. But the Italian one is a little different. Again, a distinct similarity between the aces of coins, including all the language of, although the words are different, you know, the breaking up of the language above and below the coin of the French and the Flemish cards. And in the Italian, we have the hound and the hare on the ace. The two of coins is different on all three. Now again, this is a this is not a genuine representation because the Tarocchino decks did not have 2 through 5. So I just inserted this for for continuation's sake. But you see between the Parisian and the Flemish decks that the twos are quite different, although they both take the opportunity to identify the deck. The coins are similar. For those of you who've seen my video on the coins of tarot, I've matched up ancient coins with a variety of tarot decks, which I think is really cool. And I have a lot of these coins from Italy and France and Switzerland. Again, who knows what the 3, 4, and 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5 really would have looked like. Yeah, I probably shouldn't even include them. I'm going to pull them. But again, we have the similarity between the Parisian and the Flemish decks. Even with similar markings for money. Very similar. And the 6 would have been genuine. Again, the Parisian and the Flemish, very, very similar. As are the 8s, with the Bolognese being quite different. Oh, these are the 8s. I misspoke. 7s. Well, you see how, you know, the vine loop-de-loops on both of them. Okay, this is similar. Without the floral motif, but the arrangement is very similar. But the 10s are quite different between the Italian and the others. Okay, now with the Valet of Coins in the Italian deck, we have a girl, a female youth, whereas the gentlemen in the French and Flemish decks look an awful lot alike. But he's missing the coin on the ground. In all 3 of the Queen of Deniers, we see that, you know, the coin is right in her face. Even if there are stylistic differences between them, the coin in all of them is right in her face. And her crown in the Italian deck is very interesting. It's almost like a winged Mercury on a woman there. Very interesting. The kings of these two, very similar. The coin being in his face too, but not in the French. So they took it from his lap and put it in his face. And this king's got coins all over the place. Their hats in the French and the Flemish are very similar. Practically identical. And moving on to batons, we see more of a stylistic baton, or more of a fine baton here. And whereas in the French and in the Flemish, they're more like cudgels. However, they become batons as we progress with the two. And I'm going to take these guys out because I think you get the idea. Okay. Very similar. Here we see the number. Which I guess we have seen all along. I wasn't paying attention. But the inclusion of the numbers, even today, is very handy. You know, because otherwise I'm constantly counting. How many is that? You know, I mean, you do become familiar with the patterns and the distribution of the patterns and what numbers they are. But it is kind of nice to have the number in there. So in the Italian deck, the batons are a little different. Okay, I got this one wrong. Similar, but not as similar as these two. Oh, and the other day when I was doing the Gassman Tarot video of the Vomande Express publication, they had these backs on it, and I was like, I know that back. It was from the Vandenborre. Okay, I guess I screwed up the order here. Nines. And the tens, we see a common feature of the two in the center here. Whereas here, I got the eights, so I must have confused the eights and the tens. I'm sorry. Hopefully you forgive me. Oh, there's the 10. I got messed up somewhere along the line. So in the Italian deck, the 10 is the extra two aren't in the center. One's horizontal, one's vertical, one's horizontal. Okay, the youth of baton across all three decks are male rather than female as they were in the Italian deck for coin and cup. These two again being very, very similar. There's an additional embellishment of a hill here that we don't see in the French deck. The Anima Antiqua deck in the center by Lo Scarabeo is like they stick, you know, kind of. Now these finally have the horses, all three, in the same, going in the same direction. Although the knight in the Italian deck looks elsewhere. And the queens, again, with the headdress, with the wings. Interesting. And these two being more similar. So you see a lot of similarity between the Viéville and the Vandenborre. But they do have differences. You know, they have one or two cards that are distinctly different. But and here all three are different with some similarity here. They have the crown and the floral, not exactly in the same layout, but and I'm going to get rid of 2 through 6. I regret that I even put them in here. Okay, whatever. I don't know what I did there. I must have just 2 and 2. Now look at this. Isn't this cool? I love this. And I think something similarly happens in the Anima Antiqua deck, which I think was Swiss, or maybe it was also Flemish, but I think maybe it was Swiss, where we see the animals. So then here we depart from the Marseille style or from the Viéville style to something that's more aligned with another neighboring country, you know? But I think this is very playful and fun. And of course, the swords being in the shape of scimitars is common to all three decks. Again, a little different. And then the sixes. The tops of the Italians almost look like wings, right? It starts getting messy. Sevens. Now, in the upright position, let's see. They don't have the number 7 written on here. If they do, I don't see it through the camera lens. So this one, I don't know if it should be properly up or down. And I hesitate to use the word proper, but 8. So there's a little similarity in the, not quite. They're all three different. The Italian swords are really beautiful. I guess all three are really beautiful. But 9, So it really doesn't matter because they have the numbers both ways, so I don't know that it mattered. So here we have 2 crisscrossing in a diagonal. Here we have 2 vertical and horizontal. And here we have 5 and 5. So all 3 are different in their presentation of the 10. And I know you're happy. We're getting to the end. Again, the youth is a male in the Page or Valet of Swords. These 2 again now looking quite similar. This youth having a mustache, so he's not as young. The sword in the Italian deck is a bit more threatening, reminiscent of the Death card on horse. And I think I probably mixed something up at some point because I see a discrepancy here, so maybe not. So again, we have a similarity in the hats and in posture and in just about every detail but color here. You know, the coloring of things are a little different. So we have greater similarity, again, in the French and the Flemish, with the odd man out being the Italian. Thank you for watching. I hope it was eye-opening for you and interesting. And until next time, friends, peace and stay well.